Mac ran a hand along the cold, damp stone. The mansion breathed around him, a living, creaking entity. Each room held the scent of time, dust motes dancing in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the boarded-up windows. He had lived here for years, alone, yet this wing, this hallway, felt alien, wrong. The air grew heavy, harder to pull into his lungs. An almost imperceptible hum vibrated beneath his feet, crawling up his legs. He stopped, heart thudding, at a doorway he'd never noticed before. It stood ajar, a black maw against the decaying grandeur. The mansion was playing tricks again. He should turn back. He stepped inside. The room felt ancient, steeped in a silence that pressed against his eardrums. Strange symbols, etched into the walls, pulsed faintly. A single flickering lantern cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. The air hung thick and cold, smelling of mildew and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet. Mac took a hesitant step forward, his footfall strangely muffled by the heavy silence. He glanced back over his shoulder, but the hallway behind him was gone, replaced by a solid wall. Panic tightened its grip. As he turned back to face the room, a soft click echoed behind him. The heavy wooden door had swung shut, silently, irrevocably. He spun, grabbing for the handle, but it was cold and unyielding beneath his grasp. He was trapped. A low whisper, barely audible, sent a shiver down Mac's spine. He froze, holding his breath, trying to identify the source. The room held its breath too, the silence amplifying every creak and groan of the old house. "Mac!" The whisper came again, closer now, a breath against his ear. He spun around, searching for the speaker, but the room was empty. The voice was familiar, eerily similar to his own, but distorted, echoing. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the growing unease. The whispers started as a low murmur, weaving through the room, indistinguishable words that seemed to slither along the edges of his awareness. They grew louder, bolder, his name repeated over and over, each utterance laced with a growing malice. "We know you, Mac," they hissed, their voices a chorus of his own, twisted and echoing. Each whisper seemed to pluck at a memory, a secret, a fear he had long buried. The voices were relentless, weaving through the silence of the night, stirring up emotions he thought he had locked away forever. They spoke of his childhood, his failures, his deepest insecurities, things he had sworn never to reveal. Every word echoed with the weight of regret, reminding him of moments he wished he could erase. Shame washed over him, hot and suffocating. It clung to his skin, making it hard to breathe, as if the very air was thick with accusation. How could they possibly know? "Remember the fire, Mac?" The voices taunted, their tone laced with a cruel amusement. Their words twisted like knives, cutting deeper with every syllable. "Remember the guilt you carry, the burden you never shared with anyone?" Images flashed through his mind. The flames, the screams, the overwhelming stench of smoke. He could almost feel the heat licking at his skin, the panic rising in his chest. A memory he had suppressed for years, a memory he had tried to forget. Yet, in this moment, it returned with brutal clarity, refusing to be ignored. But the whispers wouldn't let him. They grew louder, more insistent, as if feeding on his fear and vulnerability. They tore at his carefully constructed walls, exposing his darkest secrets. Every crack in the plaster seemed to reveal another hidden truth, another piece of his soul laid bare. He sank to his knees, hands covering his ears, but the whispers penetrated his defenses, slithering into his mind, wrapping around his sanity like icy tendrils. No matter how tightly he pressed his palms, the voices found their way in, relentless and cold. The room seemed to press in on him, the air thick with the weight of his past. Shadows crept along the walls, and he realized there was no escape from the echoes that haunted him, no matter how desperately he tried to run. Something glinted on the floor in the flickering lantern light, catching his attention and pulling him from his uneasy thoughts. The room was silent, except for the faint creak of the old boards beneath his feet, and the air felt thick with anticipation, as if the shadows themselves were holding their breath. A notebook lay open, its pages splayed wide on the dusty floor, filled with lines of his own handwriting. The ink seemed fresh, as if the words had been written only moments before, yet he was certain he hadn't touched a pen in days. He picked it up, his fingers trembling uncontrollably, the chill of the room seeping into his bones. Each movement felt heavy, as if the notebook itself resisted being disturbed. The words were unmistakably his. He recognized the slant of the letters, the way he always dotted his I's with a small, careful circle, and the looping tails of his Y's. Every detail was familiar, intimate, as if the pages had been torn from his own mind. But he had no memory of writing any of it. The sentences sprawled across the paper like the remnants of a forgotten dream, both foreign and eerily personal. The words swam before his eyes, blurring and twisting, detailing his darkest thoughts, his deepest fears, laid bare in stark black ink. His stomach churned with a growing sense of dread, as if he was reading a confession he never meant to make. It was his writing, but the thoughts, they were not his. Or were they? The line between memory and imagination blurred, leaving him uncertain of what was real. "You can't hide from yourself, Mac," the whispers hissed, their voices a chorus of accusation that seemed to echo from the very walls. The shadows pressed closer, as if feeding on his uncertainty. He slammed the notebook shut, his heart pounding against his ribs, breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Doubt gnawed at him, relentless and sharp, refusing to let go. Was he losing his mind? The question echoed louder than the whispers, filling the room with a suffocating sense of fear. Or had these thoughts always been buried within him, waiting for a chance to surface? As he stared into the darkness, he wondered if the true terror was not what was written, but what he might discover about himself. The whispers grew louder, their tone shifting from mocking amusement to something darker, more menacing. They spoke of a life he didn't recognize, of choices he would never make, of darkness residing within him. "You're not who you think you are, Mac," they whispered, their voices slithering around him. "You're one of us." He stumbled back, his mind reeling. The room seemed to tilt, the symbols on the walls blurring and shifting. He felt a growing sense of unreality, a terrifying suspicion that his life, his memories, were not his own. Had something taken root in his mind, twisting his perceptions, stealing his identity? The room offered no answers, only the echoing whispers that seemed to seep into his very being, planting seeds of doubt that blossomed into full-blown terror. He was lost, adrift in a sea of whispers, his sense of self slowly dissolving. The flickering lantern light caught on something by the far wall. A figure stood there, shrouded in shadow, its features obscured by the darkness. It moved closer, and Mac's breath caught in his throat. The figure stepped into the light. It was him. His face stared back at him, a grotesque mockery of his own features. The eyes were wrong, though, filled with a cold amusement that sent chills down his spine. The figure smiled, a slow, predatory stretching of lips that revealed teeth that were too sharp, too long. "Hello, Mac," the figure spoke, its voice a chilling echo of his own. Mac stumbled back, his hand instinctively reaching for the door handle, but it was no use. The cold metal felt foreign beneath his trembling fingers, as if the door itself was mocking his desperation. No matter how hard he twisted or pulled, it refused to budge, sealing him inside with his growing panic. He was trapped, not just within the suffocating confines of the room, but within the labyrinth of his own mind. Each second stretched into eternity, his sanity unraveling with every heartbeat, every shallow breath. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against him, amplifying his sense of isolation and dread. The whispers were relentless, a cacophony of voices that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. They slithered through the cracks in the peeling wallpaper, echoing down the empty hallway, filling the air with a chilling sense of unease. They knew his every fear, every insecurity, every dark secret he had tried to bury deep within himself. The voices twisted his memories, dredging up moments he wished he could forget, exposing his vulnerabilities with cruel precision. They chipped away at his resolve, his sense of self, until he was left trembling on the precipice of madness. Each whisper was like a cold hand on his shoulder, dragging him closer to the edge, making it harder to distinguish reality from nightmare. "This is your true self, Mac," the whispers hissed, their voices triumphant and unyielding. "Embrace it," they urged, as if surrendering to the darkness was his only option, the only way to find peace. He closed his eyes, squeezing them shut, trying desperately to block out the whispers, the room, the terrifying reality that was closing in around him. But the darkness behind his eyelids offered no relief, only more shadows, more voices, more fear. But there was no escape. The door remained locked, the windows sealed, and the world outside felt impossibly distant, as if he had been forgotten by time itself. The whispers were inside his head now, a constant torment that threatened to consume him entirely. They circled his thoughts, growing louder and more insistent, until Mac wondered if he would ever find silence again, or if he was truly lost within the prison of his own mind. He opened his eyes, a single question echoing through the terror that consumed him. Who was he? Was he the real Mac, or had he been replaced, his identity stolen by the malevolent entity that resided within these walls? The other Mac smiled, a knowing, cruel expression that sent shivers down his spine. It stepped closer, reaching out a hand, its touch promising oblivion. Mac didn't resist. He couldn't. The whispers surrounded him, a chorus of welcome as he stepped into the darkness. "Welcome home, Mac," they hissed. The room was silent. Only one Mac remained, a chilling smile playing on his lips. Is this the real Mac, or has something taken his place?